Hi, I'm Marla Niederer from OrsinisAngels, and this is the third part of a three-part video series on how to create this Grodnertal inspired doll. In the first video, which I'll put in a link in the description of this video, I showed you how I sculpted this using air dry clay and also using a wooden clothespin. In the second video, I showed you what I did to paint the doll, and I used acrylic paints. And in this video, this is the last one, and links to the other ones are in the description of this video. But in this video, I'm showing you what I did to costume this sweet little Grodnertal inspired clothespin doll. So let's get started. I used a 6 1/4 inch by 3 1/2 inch piece of muslin, and then I ironed a hem up on one edge, and then I pinned lace to that edge to the front side. And then I sewed it with my sewing machine. I used a very small stitch, and I used 2 rows of stitching to make sure that the lace was secure at the top of the lace, and the hem was also secured on the back of the piece. And this will be the bottom of the skirt. And I'm using an antique sewing machine, and reverse is really quite a hassle, so I just tie the ends so that they don't unravel of the threads when I'm done sewing a stitch, a row of stitches. And just cut that off and trim it. And then, like I said, I then made another row of stitches closer to the edge of the lace to secure it in place. And again, I'm just tying off the threads so that they, don't unravel. And then what I did to make the seam in the back, I just pinned it and then made a very small seam on the sewing machine. And I use very small stitches. All sewing machines are a little different, so whatever works on your sewing machine. If you're going to do that, you could do it by hand, but I kind of like the stitch on my antique sewing machine. So and again, I'm just tying off the threads so they don't unravel. And then I used my pinking shears to just neaten up the edges so there's not a lot of unraveling. Now I'm using Nymo thread, but you can use whatever thread that you like for hand sewing. I have it from my beadwork and needle sculpting work, and I typically run it over a piece of beeswax to condition the thread before I use it so it doesn't get all tangly. And I just kind of put the right side out, and I'm making a quilter's knot on one end of the thread. After I'm using a number 7 darner, actually a John James, my favorite needle. And here I'm just doing a tacking stitch, and then making a gathering stitch across the top of the skirt. Actually, yeah, it's basically the top of the skirt. And I am folding under as I'm sewing a little bit. And just gather all the way around. And I like the 9mm thread for doing this, but you could also use like a heavy duty thread. I like it because it's strong and it's not going to break. And then I'm just gathering everything, pulling the gathers. And once it's the size I want it, because I'm adjusting it right onto the doll, I'm making a couple of tacking stitches to hold it in place. And then cutting the thread off. Now, I'm using a little bit of the quick dry glue, and I'm using it to hold in place the skirt. And it's actually pulled up to the bodice part. And kind of works nicely. I use this glue a lot in paper crafting. So basically you grab what you have. That's kind of what I do. I usually shop from my stash when I'm looking for supplies rather than going out and buying new stuff. But I have this handy. So it's basically any white glue. A tacky glue would be good, you know, and anything that's quick drying. Now this is, I just cut a piece of lace for the bodice, and I basically measured it according to the size of the doll and just wrapped it around as you saw. And now I'm just cutting with a seam ripper a hole for one sleeve, and then again wrapping it around so I know where the other arm will be going through the lace, and this will be the bodice. And this can be sewn in place, but I wound up gluing it. I used the same quick dry glue, and then I wound up doing a little bit of stitching after the fact. So it's basically what you want to do and what you're comfortable with. But I was going to add some ink to it down the road, and I thought it might be nice to have the glue and make sure everything's real nice and secure and no loose threads and things like that. But anyway, so I'm just kind of gluing it around the bodice and holding it in place, and then added a little bit more for the other side. I'm taking my time with it and just kind of folding it over so there's not a rough edge. And this was a little bit more difficult to hold in place. Maybe it would have worked better with more tacky glue than what I was using, because the glue, like I said before, I use it a lot for paper crafting, and I did wind up, after all was said and done, adding a couple of stitches there to hold the back seam of the lace in place. So it's all trial by error. And here I have two pieces of lace. I believe they were like 2 inches long, and I'm just running a gathering stitch, and I'm going to use those for the sleeves. So making kind of like the puff sleeves, and I'm trying to kind of put it together right on the doll. So again, you know, working so small can get a little interesting, but it's fun. You know, I really enjoyed it, but it's not as easy to manipulate because it's so tiny, so you're getting in through all these little tiny spaces. So here what I'm doing is just securing the gather and sewing the ends together of the lace. And so I used a couple of tacking stitches, and now I'm just kind of sewing the seams of the lace together, and then I'm going to make gathering stitches on the other edge of the lace to give it like that little puffy sleeve that you often see with the Regency and the Jane Austen style of dress. And then once I'm all done making the gathering stitch, I'm tightening it up and making a couple of tacking stitches to hold it in place. And then I did add a couple of tacking stitches to the rest of the dress to kind of hold the sleeves in place. And since it was glued, it's a little more difficult to sew through, but it's not impossible. And my number 7 darner is used to all kinds of abuse. So, and here I am coming in, and like I said before, I added a couple of tacking stitches to the back just to hold the lace in place, because I didn't feel like the glue really held it the way I wanted it to. So sometimes a couple of stitches is better than glue. And then I just kind of cut it off, and I did the same thing for the other sleeve. So since you knew how to do it. Here I took a 1-inch wide piece of lace, and I wanted to put it at the bottom of the skirt. So I added a gathering stitch to it, and then since the dress is already on the doll, the way I'm going to attach it is to actually hand sew it to the dress. And it really gave it a really nice look, because I felt like the skirt was too short for the look I was going for. And so here I'm just kind of, I am pinning it to the bottom inside of the dress, and both sides. And I haven't done a tacking stitch to hold the gathers in place, because I want to make sure that the gathers are the way I would like them to look under the dress. So it kind of look, give it the look that she has a pretty little petticoat under her dress. And once I have it, the gathers the way I want them, here I'm doing a couple of tacking stitches to hold the gathers in place on the lace, and then now I'm bringing it up through the skirt, and I'm doing pretty much a little back stitch to hold things in place. And I have the gathers pinned to the dress the way I would like them, so that I have more fullness in the front. And just kind of keep everything in place so that when I'm sewing, I have everything where I want it to be. And just kind of fluffing everything up, making sure everything's where I want it. And now I'm going back and doing a back stitch, and I'm going to go around the whole skirt with a little, little tiny stitches that show on the outside. And it almost gives it like a sweet little feeling to it, I think anyway. And every once in a while my thread comes out of my needle, so that's what I was doing there. I was just rethreading it really quickly and just kind of keep going around and making sure everything's nice and secure and all the gathers are where I want them to be. And just going round and round. And I find that other than getting the thread all tangled, this is kind of a relaxing part of the project. It's almost meditative when you do needlework, hand needlework. And once I get to the back and everything's in place where I want it to be, I'll take a few tacking stitches to secure all the threads in place and finish it off. And then I'm going to take a couple of tacking stitches on the other side too. And then just nip it off. And there you have the basis of the dress. And I decided that I was going to make her a hat. And I've tried before where you use interfacing or bonded fabric, and I didn't really like it as much. So I thought I would experiment by just painting a little piece of muslin with gesso. And this way the fabric's not going to fray, and it'll make a nice firm fabric for the hat. What I did do is I used this book, and it's called Making Miniature Dolls with Polymer Clay, written by Sue Heiser, and she has some really nice costuming ideas. And this is a dollhouse size doll. So I actually used a pattern for the hat. Now in the book she used bonded fabric, but this is the gessoed muslin that I used. And I actually what I did is I used the pattern and I cut it out and I glued it according to the instructions of the book, which basically it had some tabs, and you just glued them in the back. And then what I used was the ink. This is Ranger ink, a stamp pad, and it's in the color Tea Rose. And I used it to basically add a little bit of color to the lace bodice and also to the hat. And it almost gives it like a felt look, but felt would be too thick for this size. So by doing the gesso fabric, it really kind of worked nicely. And I wound up going back and adding more ink after I thought I was done, because it really wasn't done, because I felt like it really needed another layer, and it really kind of absorbed a lot of it. So here I am going back with my second coat of ink onto the hat, and I did cut some ribbon, and I used the ribbon, this is 1/8 inch wide ribbon, and I used the ribbon for both decorating the dress and also for decorating the hat. And I used a pink, but I wanted it to look a little bit more antique-y, so I did the same thing with the ribbon. I just used a little brush for inking, and again, this is stuff I had because I've been doing a lot of paper crafting lately, so I used this in my paper crafting, and I said, why not use it for this? So I just kind of added some color to the ribbon. Now, if you have ribbon that you absolutely love and you don't want to add any color to, that's fine too. But I just kind of was using something that I wasn't in love with really, but I wanted to make it really sweet. So, and then I did follow directions from the book on making miniature rosettes, and it's basically just well, what she did was she pulled a thread from the ribbon itself. Now this ribbon would fall apart if you did that. So what I did is just run a gathering stitch along the ribbon and then just pulled it all together and then sewed it and tried to keep the, the frayed edges on the bottom part and, the nicer edges on the top of the rosette. Another option is if you did everything hand sewn, you could probably embroider a little flower on for your decoration, but I found that the gathered rosette made a nice little touch, and I used to do that quite a bit when I was really into ribbon work a long time ago. So all of our little hobbies tend to accumulate and come together at some point, don't they? But anyway, so once I did that, I used this for the ribbon at the skirt line, and then I folded it in half to get the center of the ribbon, and I made sure I had an ample amount of ribbon so that I could tie a bow in the back. And I sewed the rosette to the bodice over the ribbon to attach it, and then actually went through the rosette several times and added tacking stitches on each side to secure. And then I actually took the needle in and came out at the side to secure the waist ribbon along the dress. So like I'm tucking it under the arms and tying it. So I kind of wanted to make sure it was in the right place, so I pinned it in place on both sides. And then finished securing the ribbon in place along the waistline. Well, it's a high empire waistline. And then bringing it to the back, and making, only a few little tiny stitches so that they're not real visible on the ribbon. And then I'm going back to the back, making a couple of tacking stitches to hold everything in place. And I'm leaving the thread attached because I'm going to tack down the bow once I tie it. So tying such a tiny little bow is a little bit of a challenge, but just with a little patience you'll get there. And I wanted the ribbons to fall a certain way, so it did help to kind of tack them in place to give it a more natural look for the size of the dress. And then I'm kind of just doing a few tacking stitches here and there, make sure everything's nice and in place and held well, and then tying it off. And cutting it. And then there you have the dress. So if you don't want to do the hat, you're finished. For the hat, I decided to add a little ruffle of lace inside, as you often see in the Grodnertal dolls. So I just took a piece and again, just running a gathering stitch by hand. And then just along one edge, and then just doing a couple of tacking stitches to hold the gathers in place, and seeing that it'll fit. And then what I decided to do was just to glue it in place. So again, I used my quick dry glue, white glue, and just kind of added the glue in both places to hold it there. And like I said before, I used the ribbon, and again what I did was I used the ink, the Ranger ink, for that, and I let it dry, and then I just glued it on the very back part of the bonnet. And I thought it would be nice to actually sew the rosettes on. So I made 2 more rosettes, one for each side, and it would make it more secure because the hat is removable, and I actually tied the hat onto the doll, so it's something that you can take on and off if you so choose. And again, I just used the pattern for this bonnet from the Making Miniature Dolls with Polymer Clay by Sue Heiser. I'm not sure if it's still in publication, but I did pick it up from Amazon quite some time ago. So I'm sure, you know, any books out there on costuming, dollhouse dolls would have several different patterns for bonnets, and you can, you know, choose whatever you want for that, because it would fit the right size for this. But anyway, so I'm just kind of sewing it on and making a couple of tacking stitches to secure everything in place. And then I did this on both sides. And then I'm just kind of trimming the excess threads. And actually tying it onto the doll is a little difficult, but it's totally dry now. I wouldn't do this if it was wet still with the glue. And it is so tiny. So what I did just for this is I kind of just put a loose tug on it and held it to show you, but I actually did tie it.